For 9 straight years, every Thursday morning without fail, a refrigerated delivery truck from Hargrove Foods backed into the alley, behind the same small welding shop, on the edge of a dying industrial block in Decatur, Illinois, and dropped off another broken commercial kitchen unit that nobody else in the region would touch. No phone call ahead, no explanation attached. Just a work order clipped to a grease-stained repair tag, a tight deadline printed at the bottom, and another machine that had already defeated 2 or 3 other technicians before landing here. The man who received those deliveries never complained. He signed the work order, rolled the unit inside, and got to work. His name was Desmond Price. He was 41 years old, had forearms marked by small burn scars from years of arc welding, and kept his workspace cleaner than most hospital supply rooms. He wore the same style of dark canvas work shirt every day, not out of laziness, but because he bought 12 of them after his wife, Janet, died, and he realized he no longer had the mental bandwidth to think about clothing. That was 6 years ago. His daughter, Becca, had been 7 then. Now she was 13, and she did her homework at a folding table near the shop's back window every afternoon while her father worked. Desmond's shop, Price Industrial Repair, occupied a squat brick building with a hand-painted sign that had faded to near illegibility. He had inherited the space from his father, who had run a general machine shop there for 30 years, before his knees gave out. Desmond had upgraded the equipment, expanded into commercial refrigeration and industrial cooking systems, and built a quiet reputation as the technician other technicians called when something stumped them. He never advertised. He didn't need to. His phone rang often enough. But the Hargrove account was different. Hargrove Foods was the largest regional food service supplier in the Midwest. It operated 12 distribution centers and supplied equipment to hundreds of restaurants, school cafeterias, and hospital kitchens across 5 states. The company was run by a woman named Claudia Hargrove, granddaughter of the founder, who had taken over at 33 and promptly tripled revenue in 6 years through aggressive acquisition and vertical integration. Business publications called her visionary. Her competitors called her something less flattering. Her own employees, at least the ones who stayed long enough to form an opinion, mostly called her unreachable. Claudia had never been to Desmond's shop. She almost certainly could not have pointed to Decatur on a map without assistance. The arrangement with Price Industrial had been established by a mid-level procurement manager 5 years before she even took the helm, a cost-saving measure, outsourcing complex equipment repairs rather than maintaining a full internal service team. It made sense on paper. The line item was small. The results were consistent. Nobody escalated it to her attention, because there was nothing to escalate. The work got done. The equipment came back functional. Desmond got paid on net 30 terms, which he sometimes had to follow up on twice. That was the entire relationship. A line on a spreadsheet, a Thursday truck. What nobody at Hargrove headquarters in Chicago understood, because nobody had ever bothered to look closely, was what Desmond was actually doing with those machines. The units Hargrove sent him were never simple repairs. They were the problems that had broken other people. Industrial blast chillers with electrical faults rooted in design flaws from the original manufacturing. Combination steam ovens with cascade failures across 3 separate systems simultaneously. Refrigerated prep stations where the compressor damage was only a symptom of a deeper calibration issue that, if not corrected at the source, would cause the same failure again within 8 months. Desmond didn't just fix the visible problem. He documented the root cause, corrected it, noted the recurring pattern across similar units, and sent the equipment back better than it had originally been built. He charged for labor and parts. He never charged for the diagnostic depth. That wasn't arrogance or generosity. It was just how he worked. You fixed the thing, you fixed it right, you moved on. Over 9 years, Hargrove Foods had sent him 214 units. Desmond had successfully repaired 211. 2 had been damaged beyond cost-effective repair, and he had said so plainly in writing. 1 had arrived with a fraudulent repair history from a previous technician, and he had flagged it, saved Hargrove from a potential liability, and asked for nothing extra. He kept records of all of it in a filing system that Becca had helped him organize last summer, labeling folders with her careful handwriting while eating a peanut butter sandwich. The total value of equipment Desmond had returned to service. calculated at replacement cost, exceeded $4 million. Nobody at Hargrove had ever added that up. The first sign that something was wrong at Hargrove Foods came not from the company itself but from the Thursday truck. It stopped coming. Not gradually, not with notice, just. Thursday it didn't arrive, then another. Desmond waited a week, and called the procurement contact he had dealt with for years, a man named Al, who always answered on the second ring. The call went to a generic voicemail. He tried the general accounts line. He was placed on hold for 11 minutes and then disconnected. He wrote it off as a scheduling change. It happened sometimes with large companies. He picked up 2 other commercial accounts that month, and kept working. What he did not know, what almost nobody outside of Hargrove's inner circle knew yet, was that the company was coming apart. It had started with the acquisition of a competing supplier 18 months earlier. Claudia had moved fast on it, perhaps too fast. The target company's equipment inventory turned out to be in significantly worse condition than the due diligence had captured, and the integration costs had ballooned. Then a major hospital system contract, the largest single account in Hargrove's portfolio, had been lost to a national competitor following a series of equipment failures during the first year of service. Those failures traced back to rushed installation timelines and skipped maintenance protocols. Then a regulatory inspection of one distribution center had uncovered documentation problems that triggered a broader audit. 3 senior operations managers resigned in the same month. The CFO quietly began talking to a recruiter. Claudia had been managing the external story carefully, confident earnings calls, measured press releases, no visible panic. But internally, by the time spring arrived, the situation had become acute. Equipment at distribution centers across 3 states was failing at rates her reduced internal service team could not manage. Replacement units were back-ordered. Vendor relationships that had been strained during the acquisition were not responding quickly, and her new head of operations, brought in to stabilize things, had spent 3 weeks reviewing service records before surfacing a finding that stopped the room. He had pulled 9 years of third-party repair data. One contractor had handled more complex equipment restorations than any other. One contractor had the highest return-to-service rate by a significant margin. One contractor had flagged recurring design issues that, had they been acted on, might have reduced the current failure cascade by an estimated 30%. Price, Industrial Repair. Decatur, Illinois. The operations head looked up the company, looked up the address, then looked up the owner. He brought the file to Claudia on a Tuesday afternoon. She sat with it longer than she usually sat with anything. 9 years. She had been making decisions at this company for most of that time, and she had never once heard this name. The man had been quietly holding parts of her operation together, and she had not known he existed. She picked up the phone herself and dialed the number on file. Desmond answered on the second ring, the way he always did, wiping his hands on a shop rag. He heard a woman's voice, professional and clipped, introduce herself. He did not recognize the name immediately. Then she said Hargrove Foods, and he recognized it. Then she said she was the CEO, and he set the shop rag down. There was a pause on his end. "I haven't heard from your company in about 6 weeks," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm calling to apologize for that, and to ask if I can come see you." Another pause. "Come see me," he repeated. It was not quite a question. "This week if possible. I have a situation I'd like to discuss in person." Desmond looked across the shop at Becca, who was reading a novel and had not looked up. He thought about the 9 years of Thursday trucks. The work orders with no greeting attached. The net 30 invoices he had occasionally chased. He thought about Al, who had never once called back. "Thursday works," he said, because Thursday was when the truck used to come, and some part of him appreciated the symmetry even if she didn't know it. Claudia Hargrove arrived in a black company SUV on a Thursday morning in April. She came alone, no assistant, no operations head, no PR person. Desmond noticed that when she stepped out and looked at the shop's faded sign, she did not hide her reaction. She read it carefully, as though absorbing the fact of it. Then she walked inside. She was 44, composed in the way of people who spend years in rooms where composure is the entrance requirement. Dark blazer. No jewelry except a watch. She looked like someone who had not slept well in several weeks but had decided not to let it show. And had mostly succeeded. Desmond met her at the front. He was in his work shirt, same as always. He shook her hand and did not offer coffee because the machine was broken, and he had not gotten around to replacing it. Becca was at school, the shop was quiet. He walked her through to the main work floor. A blast chiller from a local restaurant sat partially disassembled on the main bench. Tools arranged in the order he would need them. Fluorescent lights, no windows on this side, the low hum of a compressor running in the back. Claudia looked at the space in a way that Desmond read as genuinely trying to understand it, not to judge it. "You've been repairing our equipment for 9 years, she said. "Since the summer before Becca started kindergarten," he said, which meant nothing to her, and everything to him. She looked at him. "Your daughter, she's 13 now." There was a moment of quiet that held more information than most conversations. Claudia told him what was happening at Hargrove. Not the polished version. The actual version, the acquisition that had cost more than projected, the contract loss, the equipment failures cascading through facilities she was already understaffed to support. The regulatory problems she was still working through. She spoke evenly and with precision, as though reading from a document in her own mind. No drama. Just the facts of a structure that had cracked. Desmond listened without interrupting. He had worked on enough machines to understand that most catastrophic failures were not sudden events. They were patterns of deferred maintenance, of small misalignments ignored over time, accumulating until one ordinary Thursday morning, something that should have run for another decade, simply stopped. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "What specifically is failing?" he asked. She named the unit series. Blast chillers in the distribution centers. The same family of equipment he had been seeing on Thursdays for 4 years. He knew the recurring flaw in that series. He had documented it in his files. He had noted in 3 separate repair reports that the manufacturer's factory calibration on the thermal regulation circuit was running approximately 8% outside tolerance, which created a compounding stress pattern on the evaporator coil mounts. Under normal conditions, it took 5 to 7 years for that stress to express as failure. Under heavy commercial load faster. He went to his filing cabinet and pulled out a folder, handed it to her. She opened it. "Read the first page." Turned to the second. Her expression did not change, but something behind it did. "You wrote this 3 years ago," she said. "I wrote the first one 5 years ago. That's the summary I put together after the 4th unit in that series came through." She looked at the date on the earlier document he had included in the folder. Then she looked at him. "Never acknowledged this." "No," he said. "You didn't." It was not an accusation, it was a fact, stated the way he stated facts, cleanly and without ornamentation. "Before we go further, if you've ever felt like the work you put in quietly was going unnoticed. Like you were the person holding something together that nobody acknowledged was being held. Like this video, leave a comment telling us where you're watching from, and subscribe to Dignity Tales. We tell stories about people who kept going when they had every reason to stop." Desmond did not agree immediately. He told Claudia he needed to think about it. She had asked him to come to Chicago, to work with her engineering team, to help diagnose and repair the failing units across multiple facilities. A significant commitment. Weeks, possibly longer, requiring him to coordinate Becca's schedule, call in a favor from his neighbor Ruth Ann, who sometimes covered after-school pickup, restructure his current client work. He thanked Claudia for coming in person. He said he would call her by Friday. After she left, he locked the shop early, and drove to pick up Becca from school himself. They stopped at the diner on Merchant Street, where they sometimes went when he needed to think through something out loud, and she was patient enough to listen. She ordered a grilled cheese. He ordered coffee and did not touch it. He told her about Claudia's visit. Not all of it, but enough. Becca was the kind of 13-year-old who listened before responding, which he considered either genetic or the result of growing up in a quiet house with a father who did the same. "Are you going to help her?" Becca asked. "I'm thinking about it. Why wouldn't you?" He looked at her. 9 years, he said. Not a phone call, not a thank you. I had to follow up twice every month just to get paid. Becca took a bite of her sandwich, chewed thoughtfully. "So they treated you badly," she said. "Impersonally," he corrected, because that felt more accurate. "Like a vendor, but the people whose refrigerators are broken aren't the ones who treated you badly." He looked at his coffee. That was the thing about Becca. She didn't try to resolve his problems. She just had a way of finding the exact sentence that made them simpler. "No," he said, "they're not." He called Claudia the next morning and said yes. He drove to Chicago on a Monday. He was given a visitor badge, a temporary workspace, and access to the equipment bays. Claudia's engineering team, a group of 11, average age around 29, predominantly credentialed, visibly stressed, received him with a mixture of skepticism and desperate hope that he had seen before on the faces of people who had already tried everything they knew how to try. He didn't try to impress them. He asked to see the failure logs first, then the maintenance records, then the units themselves. What he found was consistent with what he had suspected from his own files. The thermal regulation fault he had documented was real, present across the fleet, and further along in its failure progression than he had hoped. But it was correctable. Not cheaply, not quickly, but correctable with a methodical approach. Recalibrate the thermal circuit, reinforce the evaporator mounts using an improved bracket design he sketched out on graph paper the first evening in his hotel room, then resequence the maintenance protocol going forward. He showed the team what he was doing as he did it, not as a lecture, as a conversation. When a young engineer named Petra asked why he was using a particular gauge sequence on the calibration check, he explained it the same way he would explain anything to Becca, directly, without condescension, assuming she was capable of understanding it. She was. Most of them were, once they stopped performing confidence they didn't have. Desmond worked 6 days a week. He called Becca every evening at 7, when she was finishing homework. She told him about school. He told her about the Chicago weather, which he found unnecessarily cold for April, and about the hotel's breakfast, which was mediocre, and about the units, which were coming around. She sent him a photo of her science project, a model of a wave energy converter she had built from cardboard and aluminum foil, and explained to him in more technical detail than most adults could have managed. He taped it to the corner of his hotel mirror. At the facility, things started to shift. Units that had been offline came back online. The cascade of failures slowed, then stopped. Petra and 2 other engineers from the team had absorbed enough of Desmond's diagnostic approach that they were beginning to work independently, not just following steps, but understanding the reasoning behind them. He noticed that and made a point of stepping back, letting them lead. It was faster that way, and it was also right. Claudia came to the equipment bay on the 3rd week. She did not sweep in with an entourage. She came by herself, late in the afternoon, when most of the team had gone home, and stood at the edge of the work floor, watching Desmond finish a calibration check on the last unit in the current batch. He heard her come in, but did not stop working until the check was complete. When he turned around, she was looking at the floor plan he had sketched and taped to the wall, a simple diagram showing the maintenance sequencing he had proposed, color-coded by priority. "This is what we should have had 5 years ago," she said. "Yes," he said. She looked at him. "I want to ask you something directly." "All right. When you sent those repair notes, the ones documenting the calibration fault, did you expect us to act on them?" He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he thought about anything. "The first time, yes," he said. "By the 3rd time, no. Why did you keep sending them?" "Because the information was accurate and your people deserved to have it. Whether they used it wasn't my job to control." She was quiet for a moment. "That's a very particular way to operate," she said. "It's the only way I know how." He did not say it to impress her, he said it because it was true. He had learned a long time ago, before Janet died, before the shop, back when he was still trying to figure out what kind of man he wanted to be, that you could not build your self-respect around other people's acknowledgement. You did the work correctly, you documented it, you sent it. What happened after that was out of your hands. Janet had understood that about him. It was one of the things she had loved, and also occasionally found maddening. He thought about her sometimes in quiet moments at the shop, not with the raw grief of the early years, but with the steady warmth of someone who has accepted a permanent absence and learned to carry it without being crushed by it. She would have found this whole situation, the CEO coming to the garage, Desmond driving up to Chicago, the sketches on graph paper, quietly satisfying. She had always believed people eventually got around to noticing what they should have noticed sooner. He hoped she was right, he thought she probably was. Hargrove Foods did not collapse. it came close enough that the outcome had been genuinely uncertain for a period of months. But the equipment stabilization held. The regulatory audit resolved without the worst possible outcome. 2 smaller contracts were retained that had been at risk. The CFO did not resign. The board, which had been making pointed inquiries about leadership decisions, received a briefing from Claudia that was unusually candid about what had gone wrong and what was being done to correct it. Not the usual optimized investor narrative, but an honest accounting, and that candor, paradoxically, seemed to steady them. Claudia made several changes to how Hargrove operated internally. She restructured the vendor relationship process to include actual technical communication, not just transaction processing. She promoted Petra to lead the internal service quality team and gave her the resources to staff it properly. She commissioned a full audit of third-party repair contractors across the company's history to identify patterns that had gone unnoticed. The kind of value that had been delivered quietly, to a line item on a spreadsheet, without recognition or strategic engagement. The audit surfaced several such relationships. Desmond's was the largest. She called him on a Thursday morning, he noticed the day without comment, and made him an offer. Not a symbolic one, not a title that sounded significant but carried no actual weight. She offered him a role as technical quality advisor, with a scope that covered equipment standards, repair protocol development, and supplier certification. The position included genuine authority over technical decisions in his area of expertise. It also included a flexibility provision she had written specifically for his situation. No mandatory travel without 2 weeks' notice, core hours structured around school schedules, and a home base option that allowed him to continue operating out of Decatur. She also offered him a fair salary. He would later tell Becca it was the first time in his professional life he had been paid what the work was actually worth. And Becca said, with the particular dryness of a 13-year-old, who had heard her father undercharge himself for years, about time. He took 3 days to read the offer carefully, and ask several direct questions about reporting structure and decision-making authority. Claudia answered all of them without evasion. He accepted on the condition that his existing local clients be transitioned properly, not abandoned. He gave himself 6 weeks to honor his current commitments, before the new role would begin. Claudia agreed. Ruthann from across the street heard the news and brought over a pie, which Becca ate most of. Desmond's first week in the new role, he drove up to Chicago on a Monday and returned Wednesday evening. Becca left the kitchen light on, as she always did when he was coming home, late. He pulled into the driveway, sat in the truck for a moment in the dark, and thought about the last 9 years. The Thursday trucks, the work orders with no greeting, the repair notes sent into a silence, he had stopped expecting to hear back from. The years of waking before Becca, of school pickups and tight months and equipment that arrived broken and left fixed, and returned broken again, because nobody upstream was listening to what the repairs were trying to say. He was not a man who trafficked in bitterness. He had made that choice consciously, in the year after Janet died, when bitterness had been available and tempting. And he had looked at his daughter, and decided, with absolute clarity, that it was not something he could afford to bring into the house, where she was growing up. He had let it go, and kept working, and kept the lights on, and kept sending the repair notes even when nobody answered. But sitting in the truck in the driveway, he allowed himself to feel, quietly and without drama, that it had mattered. That the work had accumulated into something real. That the documentation in the filing cabinet with Becca's careful handwriting on the folders had not been pointless. He went inside. Becca was at the kitchen table with her laptop, wearing headphones, working on something she minimized before he could see it. Probably a surprise she was making for him, which she had been doing since she was 8, and thought she was subtle about it, and she was not. He made them both tea. She took out her headphones. "How was it?" she asked. "Good," he said. "Different, but good. Did they listen to you?" "Starting to," he said. She nodded, as though that were the correct answer and she had known it would be. Later, after she had gone to bed, he washed the mugs and dried them, and put them back in the cabinet and turned off the kitchen light. He stood at the window for a moment. The street outside was ordinary. A street lamp, a neighbor's car, the sound of a freight train somewhere in the distance, which you could hear from this part of Decatur if the wind was right. He thought about something Claudia had said during his second week in Chicago. They had been standing in the equipment bay after the team had left, and she had said, somewhat carefully, that she wanted to understand what she had missed. Not as an excuse, but because she intended to not miss it again. He had told her something he had told Becca once, when Becca was 11 and upset, because a friend had not noticed the effort she had put into a birthday gift. He had said, "Some people take longer than others to see what's in front of them. That doesn't make the thing in front of them any less real." Claudia had been quiet after that, not the quiet of someone who wasn't listening, the quiet of someone who was. He had taken that as a good sign. It turned out to be one. Hargrove Foods was not a transformed company. It still had the structural pressures and imperfect humans, and competing priorities that all companies had. Claudia was not a different person. She was still precise, still demanding, still capable of moving faster than was wise. But there was now, inside the operation, a small and deliberate mechanism for hearing what the quiet work was saying. For reading the documentation. For following up on the repair notes. Desmond had not built that mechanism alone. But he had been, in a way none of them had recognized until it was almost too late. The reason they had any proof such a mechanism was needed. Sometimes the person who saves a place has been waiting quietly at the edge of it for years, doing the work with no audience, fixing what others declared unfixable, sending reports into the dark on the off chance someone, eventually, would turn on a light. Desmond Price had done that for 9 years. He had not done it to be seen. He had done it because it was the right way to work. But being seen, when it finally happened, it turned out, mattered anyway.